Hello and welcome to another video review. This is the Showdown effect for PC. This review is coming to you courtesy of DWTerminator. He sent me this, so thank you. It is greatly appreciated. This is a side-scrolling action game by Arrowhead Game Studios and published by Paradox Interactive that was kind of interesting because, for one, Arrowhead Game Studios' previous game, Magicka, was really good. For what it was, anyway. It was a co-op, isometric action-adventure kind of thing where it had a pretty unique spellcasting system. It was really fun to play co-op, and even really fun to play single-player, despite having a lot of technical problems. And over time, of course, they fixed things up quite a bit, and it still has a few technical issues here and there, but it's a very fun experience, and I do highly recommend it. If you haven't seen my review of that, you might want to take a look at that, just to see what Arrowhead's done before. But suffice to say, this is a very different game from Magicka in that it's a side-scrolling action game that's kind of a mix between a shooter and a beat-em-up. And it's got some kind of interesting mechanics that go along with it, and it's mostly a deathmatch kind of game. Now, you're used to deathmatch and stuff like first-person and third-person shooters, but certainly not in a side-scroller. The only other game I can think of off the top of my head that's a side-scroller that's deathmatch is Showdown, and that was released quite a while ago, and I should probably get around to making a video on that. But anyway, the Showdown effect was kind of interesting. I did get my hands on the beta, and I played that, and it did have quite a few issues, but I chalked it up to it being a beta. Of course it's going to have issues. It's a beta. But now that the full game's out, and I have my hands on that, how's the full game? Well, the presentation's kind of interesting because of a few reasons. For one, as you can tell, it has a somewhat cartoony art style. There's some almost cel-shaded look to it, but it's not quite cartoony all the way. It's more like what they did with Magicka, only slightly more cartoonish. And it works for the game very well. The game is not meant to be taken very seriously. It's rather absurd, and of course the visual style reflects that. There is quite a bit of detail in the environments. There's lots of things going on, lots of particle effects, that sort of thing. But there is a big problem with the graphics, and that is that you can't do anything with them. Now, this is a PC-only game, and I would expect a PC-only game to have graphics options, as in I can set things to low, medium, or high, or something like that. But I can't. All you can do in this game, as of right now, which is, as of recording of this video, you can only turn on FXAA, which is only a feature that's actually included on modern graphics cards, ones released in basically the last year or two, and VSync. Those are your only two graphics options. Otherwise, you can choose what your resolution is, and whether you want to play windowed or full screen. That's it. Those are your only options. And so, with those really poor options available to you, you can't do anything to tweak the graphics to look better at the cost of performance. And that's another thing that kind of bothered me about the visuals. Even though it doesn't look bad, it's certainly not of the visual fidelity that I would expect to have as many performance problems with this game as I do. Now, it does run in DirectX 11, but that doesn't really matter. It doesn't really use all that much DirectX 11 stuff. And my graphics card is more than capable of handling this thing, but it doesn't really work out all that well. I don't really understand it. So, it might just be a fluke on my end, but it seems like performance actually degrades as you play the game, and it particularly gets bad when there's a lot of people on the same server, which the player maximum is 8. So, there's not a huge amount of players, but when it fills up and you play it for a while, you do start to notice performance drops. At least I did. Your experience might be different. And then there's the sound design, which is a complete opposite of the visuals. It's not really low quality or anything. It's very absurd in the voice acting, because everybody is basically making fun of various action movies and such like that. So, for instance, Mr. Shifu makes fun of all the kung fu movies that you would see with ridiculous, cheesy, stereotypical stuff that you would hear from those old movies. And, of course, if you look into his character bio, he actually owns an antique store, so he'll say things like, "You'll break, you'll buy," when he kills people. So, things like that add to the game to make it just a very amusing thing as far as the voice acting goes. I mean, you do have a character who's basically Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's called Dutch McClone. You got them using various lines from movies, one-liners, I mean. So stuff that you would hear in those classic action movies and such like that, you'll hear in this game, voiced by these characters. And the Arnold impersonator actually does a pretty good job, so stuff like that ends up really propelling the sound design forward, even though the sound effects themselves are fairly average. I mean, they do a very good job, but they're fairly average. And the music is kind of the same sound to it, but they do put different spins on it, like it's the same basic tune throughout the entire game, for the most part, but then you go to certain areas and it plays a different style of it. Like you go to a clubbish looking area and it plays a more club version of that song and stuff like that. And it actually works out pretty well for the game. It's certainly a good action-y tune, so that works out pretty well. And so, even though the visuals are rather lackluster in the long run, the sound design definitely propels the presentation forward. But what really matters is the gameplay, because there's really not much story to this thing at all. It's basically that all these different characters across different time periods and places were brought together somehow, some way to fight it all out in an all-out death match. That's literally the entire story of the game. It's a ridiculous premise, but it's a deathmatch game, so you don't really expect a story out of it. And to be honest with you, I'm glad they didn't go, say, the Unreal Tournament 3 route, where they really tried to work story in there. Didn't work out. But anyway, in this case, any story you're going to see is related to the characters' backstories. And each of them has their own specific storyline as far as what they were before they ended up in this environment, apparently. And that also influences, of course, how they act. Like, Dutch McClone is, of course, a clone, and so on and so forth, and he's the Arnold impersonator. And he is one of the two characters you start with, the other one being Haley Sky, who is kind of the nerdy character who is trying to finish her father's work and is constantly spouting technobabble and such like that. So, there are also several unlockable characters, and I'll get to the unlock system in a moment, but these characters are Leona Wolf, who is basically Boudica, only a bandit, like an outright bandit rather than considered a leader of the Celts. There's also Sergeant, I believe, Kowalski, who's the veteran cop who's on his final day of the job and all that, and he's constantly spouting one-liners from Lethal Weapon and such like that. There's Sir Edmund Gauntlet, who is hell-bent on revenge, and he's the very posh Englishman kind of character. There's also Mr. Sure Fu, who is he's a martial arts master, but also owns an antique shop. Hence, one of his lines is, "You'll break, you'll buy!" So, each of these characters is very stereotypical of the action hero they personify. And they end up being rather amusing. Particularly the one-liners from Mr. Sure Fu, which are just ridiculous. So, you have these characters that are, they're not really well fleshed out or anything, but they're just amusing. So, as far as that stuff goes, they did a decent job with that, but you're not really going to get invested in any of these characters, obviously. Now, each of the characters also has their own special abilities, and none of these abilities are particularly overpowered because they balance them out during the beta. And the abilities are, for Dutch McClone, he has a personal shield, which it lasted way too long in the beta, but they fixed that in the full release. And it allows him to basically go and not take any damage whatsoever for a very short period of time. Haley Sky has a jetpack, which is pretty self-explanatory, except it's not a continuous use. It's one quick boost of speed and jumping into the air and such like that. There's also Leona Wolf can just move faster. Kowalski, the cop, can actually heal himself. And Edmund Gauntlet has poison flasks that he can throw. And there is another character, but I don't have him, and I can't remember what he is, because I can't figure out how to unlock him. But he has hand grenades. There's also a character that was included in the deluxe edition of the game, and that is Mizu Ichiban. She actually has the same ability as Kowalski, so it's not like she's overpowered or anything, but she is there, and it's one of those incentives for getting the digital deluxe edition. And she's basically a parody of the character that I can't remember the character's name that was in Kill Bill, but O-Ren Ishii's basically first underling, so to speak. So each of these characters, again, have their own special abilities. In the case of Kowalski and Mizu Ichiban, they are both the same ability, it's just different interpretations of it, basically. And these abilities play out in how you actually do things. Now, all of the characters can do dodge rolls, they can dive through things or into things, they can jump off of walls or slide down walls, climb up walls if they jump close enough to the edge of them, such like that. And so you actually have quite a bit of freedom of movement in this game. And you get a variety of weapons available to you. The katana and the machine gun are unlocked by default. You can also use Kung Fu just by pressing a button, switching to your Kung Fu, and just beating the crap out of everybody. But you can also pick up items in the game world and fling them at enemies. So the weapons you unlock are the pistol, submachine gun, shotgun, rifle, RPG, and the throwing knives. These weapons are all fairly balanced except for the throwing knives, which are kind of overpowered at this point. Because unlike the guns, they don't have this one specific ability, which with the guns you actually have to have the crosshair on the target to be able to hit it. So the throwing knives don't have that problem. They throw just like any other throwing item, but they're very powerful and very accurate, very easy to use, so people tend to spam those a lot. And so you might think that, oh, because it's unlockable, it's overpowered. Actually, you can unlock anything you want at any time so long as you have enough points to unlock it. And that's kind of an interesting way they've done it. By playing matches, you'll get AP. And you can spend this AP to unlock characters, weapons, weapon skins, that sort of thing. And so you unlock characters at 1,500 AP apiece. You unlock new weapons, varying depending on what you're trying to unlock. Like some of them are, I believe, 750, and it goes lower than that as well. But there's nothing that's really outrageously expensive. It won't take you more than a few matches to actually unlock all this stuff, so long as you're not doing very badly. Because if the less well you do in the game, the less AP you're going to get. It's just that simple. Now, you do get actually bonus AP for completing achievements, which is kind of a cool thing to do. And once you've unlocked all the weapons, you can unlock weapon skins, like the minigun, which is actually the same stats and everything as the normal machine gun you get from the beginning of the game, but it's just a weapon skin. Things look different, and they may sound different, and their particle effects might be different. That's how they've managed to pull off the unlocks and the DLC for this game. Now, Day 1 DLC was in this thing, and it was horse armor. And it was, they outright said, it's a blatant joke. So, you wouldn't put it past them, right? They're the guys who made Magicka. They're going to be silly. But the rest of the paid-for DLC, again, it's all cosmetic. Except for being able to get, I believe, the extra character that has the frag grenades is actually in that. Maybe. I'm not 100% sure on that. Don't hold me to it. But most of the stuff I know for sure is cosmetic. It's just different things you can outfit your character with, like different sets of clothes, sunglasses, things like that. As well as different weapon skins that you can't unlock with AP. So, again, they've done a good job of this unlock system and the paid-for DLC being all cosmetic, except for the few things you can unlock, which are pretty cheap, actually, as far as the weapons and such go. So you have a pretty even playing field from the beginning of the game. Now, each of these characters having their own abilities means that you're probably going to find one that you like over all the other ones just because you like the way they play. Like Mr. Sherfu has that kick of fury, for instance, which is a really powerful kick. It used to be way more powerful than it is now. But again, they balanced the game out a bit. And so, you'll probably find someone you like. Like, for instance, I tended to be fond before the full release. I tended to be fond of playing Haley Sky because of the jetpack ability. But now that they've nerfed it, I tend to go all over the place, just play the different characters, see what I like. So, there's quite a bit of room for enjoyment in this game, and it does allow you to do custom games, which can have custom rule sets, which you can also unlock via AP. And that's stuff like one-hit kills, or quad damage, or no loadout weapons, one loadout weapon, that sort of thing. All sorts of different mutations on the normal Showdown Effect gameplay that are actually pretty nice. Now, there are only a few game modes available and only a few maps available. So there is limited replayability in that regard. You have your basic deathmatch, which is Showdown, and the trick there is toward the end of the match, you'll get a period of Showdown, where you no longer can respawn, and the last man standing gets a bonus of, I believe, 3 points. So the person who is the last man standing can actually be the winner, if they were already the winner or not. So it's kind of a cool feature that it works out pretty well. There's also a team elimination, which is basically team deathmatch, only the more players die on a given team, the longer it takes for that team to have respawns. And it starts out with a low respawn rate. It's like maybe a few seconds, whereas the more their teammates die, the longer it takes them to respawn. So it's kind of an interesting mechanic, and it works out pretty well. I mean, whenever the one team is completely eliminated off of the map and hasn't respawned, any of them anyway, then the other team wins that round, and it goes on and on and on until the one of the two teams wins. There's also a one-man army where each of these henchmen characters who are extremely easy to take down, who you're playing as for the most part, has to take down the one-man army, who is the full-on character who's just mowing them down left and right. And it passes on and on to whoever takes down the one-man army. So it's a pretty cool idea, actually. It can be frustrating if you're on the henchman side, but it is very satisfying when you take down the one-man army. So there's also the Expendables mode, where you have a team of these the full-on characters, and they have to be taken down by the other team, which is the henchmen characters that you see in one-man army. So they're really fragile, and they only get one weapon, and they don't get to pick up anything and throw it, basically. But it's a very interesting game mode, and it can be very frustrating, again, if you're on the henchman side. But at the same time, it's still very satisfying. The only real problems I have with this game are that ranked matches tend to be way laggier than normal matches, which are already really laggy to begin with. There is just something wrong with the netcode in this game, and it's also running on peer-to-peer. So it's going to be laggy to begin with, but again, there's something wrong with the netcode. I don't know what, but it gets pretty laggy sometimes, and that does get very, very frustrating. And so that's a very big issue that they need to fix. The other issue I have with them is, in addition to lag spikes, you'll probably see a lot of performance drops that don't really seem to mean anything. You're not really sure why they happen. Now, I hope that they'll fix these problems soon enough, but they are pretty big issues. And as far as I know, ranked matches are matchmaking only. It's been a while since I've played a ranked match, because I never really liked it during the beta, and I never really went back to it anyway. So it's a weird situation where the game itself is actually really fun and really challenging, because it takes a lot of practice to get that aiming mechanic down. It takes a lot of practice to get all the movement down, because you can get really fast-paced gameplay. The 8-player limit doesn't really bother me at all. It feels actually really good for the map sizes and everything. So it works out really well in that regard. But I think because of these lag issues and because of the just these technical problems that the game has, very few people actually play it right now. And it didn't come out that long ago. It came out in March. So I don't really understand that it should have a bigger player base than it has. But again, it's probably because of these technical problems that you're not seeing all that many players. It's a shame, because it is a really fun game when it works. But it does have the problem of not working most of the time. So, keeping that in mind, even though it is a really fun game and it does occasionally get frustrating, but that's just built into the game. If it didn't have the technical problems, I would give it probably a 3.5. If I was feeling really generous, maybe a 4, but mostly a 3.5. If they ironed out the technical problems to the T and maybe put in more content that was more fun to play on, because, I mean, only a handful of maps, only a handful of characters, they can expand on that. And if they do expand on that, that would be more of a 4 material. But again, that's only if they fix the technical problems. So, not factoring in the technical problems, 3.5 out of 5. But, factoring in the technical problems, a 2.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.